Good morning. You've tuned into Money Control and I'm Karunya Rao. And today we'll be discussing a very relevant, a very topical subject of India-Russia bilateral trade. As the West continues to impose sanctions on Russia for its invasion of Ukraine, reports suggest India is exploring the possibility of making the Chinese yuan a reference currency to value the rupee-ruble trade mechanism. The time-tested relationship between Russia and India could face many twists and turns amid this new geopolitical angles, shifting dynamics of global power, an emboldened China and a deeper Russia-China relationship. Joining me today is Santosh from CNBC TV 18. Santosh, please help us understand, what exactly is happening. Because if we look at the last 10 years, the bilateral trade between Russia and India has hovered just at about $10 billion odd. At this point in time, would it be worthwhile to take a relook at their trade relationships? Is now a good time?
Well, if you look at it, you're right, Karunya, that Russia is not a major trading partner for India. And over the last many years, the overall trade has averaged roughly around $10 billion a year, which is not a very big sum. But the key point at this stage is the rising prices of crude. And that's where a heavily oil importing country like India hurts. So there are efforts right now to kind of source crude oil from Russia at this point and at rates which are far cheaper or which make sense for India. So clearly towards that end, India is trying to reach out to Russia and trying to devise mechanisms whereby it could in a way sidestep some of the sanctions which have been put on Russia, most notably its inclusion from the global financial messaging system SWIFT, because of which right now Russia is unable to make or give payments in dollar or euros.
But talk to us about how this rupee-ruble system of trading could work. What does it exactly mean?
Now, this is a system which has been experimented with in the past. How it works exactly is that Russia has a bank, opens an account with an Indian bank, and India opens an account in a Russian bank. The advantage of what we call the ruble-rupee system or the rupee-ruble system is that it allows the exporter to make payment in the domestic currency, which means that if an Indian exporter is exporting to Russia, he will receive the payment in rupee terms. And similarly, the benefit for Russia is that when a Russian exporter exports to India, that he receives the payment in rubles. So there is a certain amount which is held by, they arrive at a certain amount, let's say just for example $500 million. So they will hold the Russian bank will hold the equivalent of $500 million in its Indian account and vice versa. Now the system was there in the past, but it works better when there is a certain kind of parity in terms of both the exports and imports. But what happens is that typically India imports more from Russia than what it exports. So which kind of left Russia with a higher rupee reserves, and which is why the system in the past, while it has been experimented with, was not really successful.
It's not a balanced equation.
It's not a balanced equation, and which is why it did not work very well.
So who stands to gain if at all this happens? Will we actually get oil at a discounted prices, and should consumers expect some kind of pass-through of the discount eventually?
Very clearly, at least India will be a major beneficiary, but you must also remember the fact that right now the ruble has weakened against the dollar. Now, there is no direct rupee-ruble conversion rate.
Yeah.
If you have a direct conversion rate, then it still works easier. But right now, there is no direct conversion rate.
But could they be also working out a floating rate of
They will
sorts?
have to do something like that, because otherwise then it won't make sense to import, in a currency which is quite weak, which means that you will end up paying much higher.
Yeah.
So which is why at this point there is advantage very clearly, and other nations too have been buying oil and gas from Russia at this point. So clearly if India is getting that at a discounted rate, it surely helps. It would serve India's interest at this point, I would say.
But where does China come into the picture? Because there's some talk of yuan as well coming into this equation.
Well, there are reports basically that Russia and China are kind of trying to devise a system whereby they can kind of reduce the overall dependence on dollars and replace that as the right now it's the world's reserve currency. So they are kind of trying to come together and devise a system whereby the overall reliance on dollar as the reserve currency goes down.
So, okay, let's talk about the India impact. Which are the sectors or which are the items that we typically import from Russia and we export to Russia as well? Which sectors stand to be impacted?
So, if you look at the imports, they are mostly petroleum products, and if you look at exports, there's some bit of pharma and engineering products. But as I said, the exports are far lower, and it is more of imports. And again, if you see the list of most active trading partners, Russia does not really figure on that list. Why Russia is in focus at this point is very clearly because of the rising prices of crude, and India could well do with some relief on that front.
So, if say India and Russia do reach an agreement, won't US be like extremely peeved?
Well, yes. So, Karunya, I think there is of course, you do get cheaper oil, but there could be other costs as well. That is antagonizing the US and allies, because at this point the world is largely against Russia. The good part is that there is no ban on trading with Russia as such, because if you see, even the US and allies are buying oil and gas from Russia, so that trading is on. So, at this point there are strict sanctions in place, but trade is still on. So, in that sense, India is not violating any particular sanction, that's a trade sanction. But what happens is, if US and allies say that you just can't deal with, let's say there are certain products you just can't buy from Russia, let's say oil and gas, then that makes India's position a little tricky.
So, how is this likely to shape up? Because things are changing so quickly, it's so fluid. How is it likely to shape up? What is India now likely to do in the immediate foreseeable future?
Well, Russia is clearly, India has relations with Russia, it's an ally very clearly. So, it has, so for the moment it has not kind of taken any hard steps against it, but this is still a very evolving situation. But clearly it's not a major trading partner for sure. So, once this probably crude prices come down, maybe then I think there could be a change in stance.
So, if Rupee-Ruble do, decide on a floating rate, could it threaten rupee's valuation in any way? Could rupee be under?
No, this is clearly just a arrangement kind of to buy crude at a lower price.
So, from a macro perspective, there is no threat to Indian rupee or Indian markets or the trade situation?
No, because India has done something similar with Iran also. It had a similar arrangement with Iran a few years back when Iran was facing sanctions, and it did manage to get around that and buy oil from Iran. So, this system has worked with other countries as well. So, there is no threat to the rupee as such, except in the form of probably sanctions from the US or the European Union.
Which I think is not something to be taken lightly, at least as of now, but it's a very dynamic situation. So, let's wait and see how it pans out. But thank you so much, Santosh, for joining in and for shedding some light on how this could play out. Thank you so much to all our viewers as well for tuning in. I hope we were able to put things in perspective with respect to India and Russia bilateral ties and how things are likely to play out. But for now, it's a wait and watch. Thank you so much for tuning in.